Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Today we are in Parashah Chukat. Chukat means statute, but it also means decree. Can you feel it? Chukat feels like a decree. We're going to look now about waters, the waters of immersion. Now, in third world countries where the poverty can be terrible, it's hard for them to get clean water. There's unclean water. And so charities, and so they would go maybe a mile or two to get a bowl of water and bring it to the village. So charities now build pumps for the villages.
So charities now build pumps for the villages. So they have
And
running water.
so to them, the water is like we're talking about the red heifer. It's called the paradox of purity. God commands them to get a red heifer and to slaughter it and to use the ashes and mix it with water, and that brings cleanness when you do that. But the paradox is that they get the ashes to make cleansing, the offering that's clean, the offering is made to clean the unclean, but actually it should be the other way around. So in Numbers 19:9, it says you are to use the water for purification from sin. And it's also commanded for the community. So we see that cleansing is not only done through the individual, it's also for the community. So how does this to do with Yeshua? Well, Yeshua came from heaven, and then he entered the human race. In a sense, he became like the red heifer. He became, as it says in 2 Corinthians 5:21, he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we may become the righteousness of God through him. In Numbers 19:18, it talks about the waters cleansing from death. And in Numbers 25, there was no water to drink. So God sent poisonous snakes. And God commanded Moses to put up a pole and to put a snake on it. And many of the Israelites died, thousands died, but whoever looked at the serpent would be healed. Now sin can be like poison. When I was a lot younger, many years ago, I ate at a restaurant and I got terrible food poisoning. And that can be what sin can do to us. Now, Miriam and Aaron dies in this Parsha. And is there any connection between the death of Aaron and the death of Miriam? Remember, there's always a connection. In the Torah, there's always connections. So in the Parsha, it talks about the difference between life and death, living waters or waters of judgment. I was in Israel a number of years ago, and one of the tourist sites was at the Dead Sea. So we went into the waters of the Dead Sea, and I had a skin rash of psoriasis. So I'm in the Dead Sea, say to myself, why don't I take some of the mud and put it on my leg with the psoriasis? And I got healed. Not immediately, but I got healed, and I still have very mild psoriasis, but it was definitely a miracle. Now, when Moses was leading the Israelites through the land of Edom, Moses asked if the Israelites could go through the land of Edom. But they said, no, you may not come through. And Moses says, we will pay for the water for ourselves and for our flocks. What we see here is that water, again, we see that water is so valuable. Receive living water of Messiah. Now let's back up a little bit. Starting with Genesis, the second verse of Genesis, the very beginning of the Torah, says the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And in Genesis 2:10, a river flowed from Eden to water the garden. We see it starts very early. But you know, water can be beautiful. Water can be a great, great blessing. But God can also use water for judgment, as in the flood with Noah. And God can turn blessings into curses and curses into blessings, just as the first plague put on the Egyptians. He turned the waters of the Nile into blood. But God also turns curses into blessings. It says, I will turn, this is in the scriptures, I will turn your curses into blessings because I love you. Now, wells are a big part of early Israel history. Abraham commanded his servant to get a wife for his son Isaac. So the servant travels and he stops at a well, and he asks if the family of Nahor's city is there. And so the servant, Rebecca becomes Isaac's wife. And a similar story, Jacob goes again to his family to find a wife for Jacob, and Jacob finds Rachel, who would become his wife. And when Moses was leaving the land of Egypt, when his life was in danger, so he left, and he came to a well, and there were 7 daughters of a Midianite priest, and Moses helped the daughters because there were some people that were bothering the daughters, and Moses delivered them out of their hand. Now, in Numbers 21:17, it says, Israel sang this song, "Spring up, O well, sing about it. The well the princes dug, that the nobles of the people sank with their scepters and with their staff." Israel sang about it because they were praising. So great was water that they were praising God. Now, there's a little story. There was this guy in this town, and he was the most religious man in the town. And there was a river coming, a flood. So a truck comes by and says to this religious man, come, you got to get on the truck, the flood is coming. And he says, no, the Lord will save me. And then he has to go up to the next level of the house. And a boat comes by and says, come, get in the boat. You're going to drown. And he says, no, the Lord will save me. Finally, he gets to the top of the house on the roof, and a helicopter comes by and lets down a rope and says, come on, grab the rope. You're going to drown. What are you doing? And he says, no, the Lord will save me. And then he dies, and he goes to heaven, and he says to Yeshua, why didn't you save me? You know I was the most religious man in the town. And Yeshua says, who do you think sent the truck? Who do you think sent the boat? Who do you think sent the helicopter? Now, I would like to talk about association. Association may be the most important factor in becoming a Messianic Jew or a Messianic Gentile. And today we're just going to touch upon the Jewishness of the flood. Of water. Now, association. There's approximately, in the world, there's 99% of the world is non-Jewish, and 1% of the world is Jewish, maybe a little less. And so, because of now the doors of Judaism opened up to the rest of the world. When Yeshua came, and first the movement was Jewish, but after some years, it started out like we know, John the Immerser. He is thought of as being a Gentile, but both his parents were Kohanim, and of course, Yeshua was Jewish, and his mother, the mother of Yeshua, commonly known as Mary, she was also Jewish, and the early apostles and the movement was Jewish. But because most of the world is Gentile, they associate these things as being Gentile, when we know that it started out as being Jewish. Now, the Essenes were a sect at the time of Yeshua, and one of the big rituals of the Essenes was water immersion, and not just when someone first becomes immersed as they believe, but as a more common practice. Also in the Dead Sea Scrolls. John, it is that the immersion of John originated in the early Israel with Aaron. In certain times, Israel had to go and get cleansed through water. And it evolved to the point where John the Immerser, that's how John the Immerser's immersion started. There's even a sect today that practices water immersion. And again, not just after not after just personal salvation, but also as a continual practice. Even in Jewish ritual, there's something called the mikvah, and it is traditional. Even today, there are times when Jewish women go into the mikvah, for instance, after giving birth. And now, about conversion. It is commonly thought that it is the Jews that were baptized to become a believer in Yeshua. But first, the immersion was for the Jewish people. And then, when the Gentiles received Yeshua, they received the initiation of water immersion. So, immersion was a Jewish ritual which eventually became a sign of conversion to the Gentiles. Association is so important. Now, with Yeshua, the beginning of Yeshua's ministry, it says at the very beginning of Yeshua's ministry, it says that he was immersed by John. And with miracles, when the nation of Israel came through the Red Sea, it was, in a sense, an immersion for all of Israel, for the nation of Israel. And there were other miracles that Yeshua did relating to water. His first miracle was turning the water into wine at the wedding where he was attending, and walking on the water, and to the storm on the sea, peace, be still. Now, to change now, sports were a very big part of my life. It was mainly my whole life when I was a kid and a teenager, until I came to believe at 18 years old, and that became my main focus. I worked as a lifeguard, and without water, you can only live 7 or 10 days without water. And I also dove in a swimming meet. I dove, and there's even a teaching about diving. Sometimes, when you have to make a decision, it's time to just go for it, to dive in. Now, there are different levels of risks. There are small risks, medium-sized risks, and big risks. So you got to be careful. I'm not saying you always dive in, but there is a time to take a risk. Now you have to be careful. You got to make sure there's water in the pool where you're diving. But now my father was from a very poor family in Brooklyn, and he despised the poverty. It was so, he despised it. So he was constantly telling me, wash your hands, like before meals, before dinner. Wash your hands, wash your hands. I wasn't offended. He loved me, but sometimes, the cleansing of water, living water, receive living water of Messiah. And in Psalm 42:2, as the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Just as we get thirsty, whether it's through sports or walking. I remember drinking with my perspiration. I remember enjoying when it was cold water. I remember what a blessing it was. Of course, there's the physical blessing. There's also the spiritual blessing. There's water and there's living water. In Psalm 36, 9 and 10, you give them drink from the river of your delights, for with you is the fountain of life. In the town where I live, White Plains, there was a park, and it was a seedy park. I mean, the location was right in the middle of White Plains, but it was to a degree a seedy park. So somehow they decided to build a fountain, and they built the fountain the fountain right there, and they did an amazing job. The park with this new fountain changed the park from being seedy to beautiful, and the fountains were one of the best fountains I've ever seen. As Yeshua said, he who believes in me, out of his innermost being will flow living water. And in Matthew 5:6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. In John 4:10, Yeshua was sitting by the well. He was exhausted from his travels. This is in the scripture. And it says in everyone, Yeshua was talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. And he says to her, everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never be thirsty. For the water I give him will become a fountain of water within him, springing up to eternal life. Receive living waters of Messiah. And in Acts 1:2, you will be immersed. Yeshua, after his resurrection and before his ascension, it says, Yeshua says, you will be immersed in the Ruach HaKodesh not many days from now. And in Revelations 22:1, the angel showed me a river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the city street. On either side of the river was a tree of life. And then a little down, no longer will there be any curses. Receive living water of Messiah through the ashes of the red heifer. Receive living water of Messiah and have purity. Receive living water of Messiah and be saved from the poison of sin. Receive living water of Messiah and have curses changed to blessings. Receive living water of Messiah and you will see miracles. Receive living water of Messiah and drink from the fountain of life. Receive living water of Messiah and be immersed in the Ruach HaKodesh. So, what about us? What does God want us to do? Well, let's go back to Chukat. God is giving us a Chukat. God is giving us a decree. As it says in Matthew 28:19, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, immersing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Ruach HaKodesh, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And remember, I am with you even to the end of the age. Shabbat Shalom.